introduce yourselves? And Sherry, remember to do the AI thing, right, for note taking? Yeah, okay. We're getting so 2024 here. Um, so I'm Vicki Banyard. I lead the Resilience Portfolio Consortium with Sherry and have been working on the resilience portfolio model and related resilience topics for a long time. So I'm at Rutgers University in New Jersey. Um, so we've got two people on Matt Chaublin's account. You all want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hello. I'm Matthew Shoblin. I'm a master's student at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga. And I'm also a former student of Dr. Hamby's. Done a scoping review with Dr. Hamby. Was kind of a part of that lineage here. And This is Joe. You want to introduce yourself, Joe?
Hi, I'm Joe Carpenter. I'm also a master's student at UTC. I'm currently working on my thesis, and it's looking at resilience in disabled individuals. And Matt said he was jumping in this, and I thought it would be interesting and informative for me, so I decided to join him for as long as I
Super, we're glad to have you. Great. And if you like it well enough, then feel free to sign up and you can get our messages and things like that. We try not to send too much stuff out, but great. So Brittany,
Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany. I am currently a clinical psychology doctoral student at the University of Mississippi, and I am also a assistant at the Central Arkansas VA, and I work under Dr. Marcy Weber, who couldn't be here today, but she is also very involved in the RPC as well.
welcome. Awesome. Sheila?
Yeah, I'm Sheila Hansen. I'm clinical psychologist by training, faculty member at the University of North Dakota, and part-time clinician. And I've worked with Brittany and Marcy.
Awesome. Love the community. Matthew Hagler.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I'm faculty at Francis Marion University. Um, Also practice part-time.
Great. Awesome. Nicole.
Hi, everyone. This is my first time being at the RPC, so it's so exciting to be on here. I've been wanting to be on here, but it hasn't worked on my schedule. So nice to see familiar faces, but also some new ones. So I am Nicole Yuan at the University of Arizona in the College of Public Health and trained as a clinical psychologist, but have now been in public health for quite a long time and have been fortunate to work with Sherry and Vicki and so many of you on ResCon, and happy to be here today.
Awesome. Great. Good to see you. Katie Howell.
Hey everybody, it's great to see you. I'm Katie Howell. I'm on faculty at University of Wisconsin in Madison, and also my first time being able to come to one of the virtual RPC meetings. So really excited to see some familiar faces and some new ones as well.
So awesome. Hope Wisconsin is treating you well, Katie.
First snow is coming today, so it ain't
There you
Tennessee,
go.
friends. It ain't Tennessee.
Katie Q.
Oh, hi everyone. It's so nice to see folks. I'm Katie Corna. I use she, her pronouns. And Katie Howell, I didn't know that you were in Wisconsin. That's so great. I live in Minneapolis. I'm trained as my PhD is in social work, and I do gender research. And right now I don't do much. I'm doing a lot of resting. So I'm very thankful I've been a part of the RPC, I guess, for a few years now. And then this year, this is the first time I've been able to see folks on the screen. So thank you. Thank you for continuing to include me.
Awesome. Great. Great. It's great to have you. Lisa.
Hello, everyone. I am Lisa Colon. I am I can talk, assistant professor at Washington State University in the Department of Human Development. My degrees are in psychology and my PhD also in social work. So yeah, it's great to be here.
Great. Awesome. Awesome. Wyatt.
Hi, I'm Wyatt. I'm currently a master's in the psychological sciences at Cleveland State University.
Great, welcome. Rujiko, I'm not sure if I pronounced your name right. Apologies.
No, that is all right. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Rujeko. I am a yes, as it's spelled, Rujeko. You also hear Ru or Ruru, so don't be confused. It is me. This is my first time here, so it now has worked out with my schedule, so I'm excited. And I'm a PhD candidate in the College of Social Work at the University of Kentucky, specializing in post-traumatic growth among intimate partner violence survivors.
Love all these first-time people who are able to make the meeting. Welcome, welcome. It's awesome. Jonathan.
I'm Jonathan Davis. I teach in human development at family science at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. And I missed the beginning, so am I supposed to say anything else?
That's good. We're
Okay.
just going around. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Jonathan. Sarah. Sarah may not be fully connected yet. Oh,
okay,
there you are.
there I am. Sorry, I'm in the car. I'm almost home. I'm Sarah Parmenter. I am a doctoral candidate in the College of Social Work at Ohio State, and I study worker resilience, workplace resilience.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Danielle.
Hi, everyone. This is Danielle Rousseau. I am at Boston University, a faculty of BU, working at the intersection of mental health and criminal justice and women's gender and sexuality studies. Great to be here today. Sorry I can't be on camera.
No worries. Just glad to have you. Lois. Okay, maybe we'll come back to Lois. Christina.
She said, and maybe she's coming through.
Oh, is it
Oh,
something?
it's Sherry. Thank you.
Oh.
Sorry. Yes, I'm driving, but I'm Christina Ray Bennett. I'm a PhD student at Indiana University School of Social Work. I'm fourth year. Also, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I provide child and family therapy to kiddos. And my interest area is building resilience in kids, focusing on empathy.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much. Lois, I saw you were unmuting. Do you want to join us now? Thanks.
Okay, I wasn't expecting to speak. I was just expecting to listen, but I'm Lois Engelbrecht. I have a PhD in social work and I work in child sex abuse in the Philippines and India. And I'm really interested in all the resilience research from the US because we do a lot of it in the Philippines as well. Thank you for letting me join.
Oh my gosh, wonderful. Great to have you. And no pressure to speak from here on out. We just like to do a little voices in the room to introduce folks. So thanks for jumping in. And last but not least, Shayna.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Shayna Kumar. I'm a postdoctoral fellow associated with the National Center for PTSD at VA Boston. My research interests these days are really in the areas of trauma resiliency and well-being.
Great. So great to have you all here. It's awesome. So we have sort of our two purposes, agenda items. One is to share out and have a little discussion around resilience work that's going on. So Sherry's going to kick us off with some quantitative synthesis of some work on the resilience portfolio model that she's been pulling together. And I know this group has heard a lot about the scoping reviews and the special issue that will be coming out in trauma, violence, and abuse in the new year. And so I'm going to provide a little bit of a review of the reviews. In the monthly minutes, you all have been hearing about some of the individual scoping reviews. Those of you who are at ResilienceCon this past April also got to hear about some of the findings, but I'm going to now present some of the overarching themes and things that we've been pulling together from across the scoping reviews. And then Sherry's going to talk a little bit about the next special issue that's coming up, which we're super excited about. And then we hope after all that, we'll still have a little chance to popcorn in if people have some things they want to share with the resilience work that they're doing, and we'll be in community. So Sherry, over to you.
Thanks, Vicki. And yeah, it's great to see everybody here today. So we're going to try to go through this fast because we do want to have time to talk about the special issue and answer any questions that anybody might have about that. We've already gotten several queries about it, and so we'll have more details on that. But if you're looking for inspiration about next steps to take in resilience research, we are going to very briefly share where we are now in terms of what we think is happening. So am I sharing my screen now successfully? Yeah, great. Okay, so um, so hopefully there's been quite a lot of work that's been done at this point in terms of both like kind of formal quantitative and qualitative resilience portfolio studies, as well as the scoping reviews. There's going to be 10 scoping reviews. Some authors of some of them are several of you guys are authors on those. And what we're really trying to think about is like, what's the next generation going to look like? And I don't think that you can really know what is the promising thing to do in the next generation unless you know what the takeaways are from the work that's been done to date. And I think one of the things that's gotten hard as research publication is just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it can be very hard to figure out what the takeaways are. And co-editing the special issue, which we have also done with Susan Yoon and Caltrina Kelmendi, has given us a chance to do that, and as well as some of the work that we're doing. So the resilience portfolio model, I know everyone's in different places with how much that you know about it. I'm not going to actually cover a ton about it right now. So I don't think you have to really be like an expert in the resilience portfolio model to, to think about what you might come next. But basically, I mean, one of the things that is important to know is it's the first resilience framework to consider trauma dosage, and not just whether somebody is a victim of child abuse or not, or sexual assault or not, but what is their lifetime cumulative dosage. And that turns out to be the most powerful way to understand what is driving people's symptoms and problems in living that they might be experiencing. And the great thing that revolution and understanding, whether you talk about it in terms of adverse childhood experiences or polyvictimization or a lot of formulations of like complex trauma. Those are all different ways of kind of capturing this idea that your lifetime burden, your lifetime exposure is really the thing that's most important about how you're doing in the world now. It has really led to this explosion of interest on dosage on the other side, and trying to beef up the different kinds of strengths that you have in your life in order to counter whatever bad stuff you've got in your life. And I don't have slides on this, so you're just going to have to take my word for it that there's a lot of data that shows that really you can counter even very high doses of trauma and still manage to thrive and put together a good life. If we have a lot of information about that we can share. But I think the key thing is, and so if you're thinking about what you might do for the special issue or what you might do for your thesis or dissertation or your next grant proposal or whatever it might be, is that we're really very interested in this question about what strengths help the most. And not that, I mean, there's a lot of good things out there in the world. There's dozens of good personality characteristics or resources in the community or whatever. I mean, probably hundreds even that you might be able to conceptualize that, but like which ones really are, if you only had limited resources, which of course we almost always do, like which ones would you really get the most bang for your buck if you help people invest in developing? So what we've done today, and I hope you'll forgive me talking fast, I just don't want to take up too much time with this, but so far in terms of like formal quantitative resilience portfolio studies, we have 16 data sets, and across those 16 data sets with more than 20,000 participants altogether, we have looked at uh, 41 outcomes. So they're not 41 different outcomes. They're mostly like subjective well-being, post-traumatic growth, health-related quality of life, trauma symptoms, and things like that. And we have looked at them 41 times. And as you can see from this slide, these are like the first 10. There's some that are focused on youth as young as age 10. There's a bunch of adults, and then there's some that have been both adults and adolescents in the same study. And some of these we're actually still writing up. So all of this new VIA data set is just data that we collected pretty recently and are in various stages of writing that stuff up. Like Marcy, for example, Weber is working with us on one of those. And I wanted to, before I get into this, so across all of those different data sets, we've looked at 64 different psychosocial strengths, and mostly I'm going to tell you that a lot of them are actually not very important. But I want to, before I get into that too much, I did want to just pause and tell like a quick story about them, because I am ready to dismiss a lot of them as not very promising. I mean, they're good things to have. I mean, some of the things that are on that list of ones I'm ready to ditch are like kindness, for example, is on there. And so I don't think kindness is bad, or that kindness is even like bad for you. But what I am, and what Vicky and everyone who's doing resilience portfolio stuff, what we're specifically interested in is what helps you overcome trauma and what helps you thrive, even if a lot of bad things have happened to you. And it turns out that there's actually a pretty, as far as we've been able to figure out so far, not everything is necessarily helpful for that. But I also just want you to know, like, it's that I think one of the things that's really holding the field back is that we don't test enough ideas at the same time, and that whenever we do test an idea, we get super invested in it and we don't want to give it up. And so I want to tell you a story, a sad story and a happy story about some things that are on this list of 64 strengths. And so the relational motivation, that's the sad story. So this was something that really, I mean, we invested a huge amount of resources into this. It was something that came out of a lot of the focus groups and interviews that we did. So we started off with this really labor-intensive qualitative work to try to figure out what people were doing in their lives and what's missing from the literature, like what stories aren't we telling? I'm like so invested in that idea of like what stories aren't we telling about how people overcome trauma. And one of the things that kept coming up over and over again is like, well, I stayed in school for my mom, or I want to follow my brother into the Navy. We're a Navy family, and and that's what we decided to call like relational motivation. That some of the things that were keeping people persevering even through really difficult circumstances was this feeling of really wanting to make other people, loved ones proud. I mean, a few people talked about coaches. It wasn't all family members. So after we did all these interviews, we're like, wow, this is something you don't hear about in the field. What a great idea. These stories are so touching. I mean, honestly, I didn't do all of those groups. Some of my folks like Matt Hagler and many others did some of the interviews in groups, but I mean, they were so touching. I mean, I was like almost welling up with tears when I was hearing some of these stories. I mean, they were just beautiful stories. And then we developed a bunch of questionnaire items because I'm really into measurement development. And then we went back out into the field for more qualitative work. And we did all these cognitive interviews with both like parents and adolescents to try to like, are we capturing this concept? This is what we've heard. Do these items feel like that captures that to you, if that were true for you? And we're like, felt really good about these items. And then we rolled them out in like 2 different data sets, and we got like complete diddly squat with them. And in fact, we actually got 2 results that were significant in the wrong direction, and that people who were saying more like, yeah, I'm doing it for my mom or whatever, actually looked worse than like the other kids in these and adults in these samples. And And so that was sad for me, but I got rid of it anyway, and I just still put it on the list of things that I don't think are very promising for investing more. I mean, if somebody is really interested in this idea, I do think it is a fascinating idea that we actually don't have much social science about, but I don't think it's a very likely candidate for what we should be creating our prevention and intervention to focus on in order to help people, reduce or overcome trauma. But on the other hand, like my happy story is about this concept that we're calling positive emotion regulation. And in fact, we should have a paper coming out on that in just a couple of days and online first. And this also came from the same path. Like we did a bunch of focus groups. All these people were talking about not only being able to manage their anger and distress, which if you are familiar with most of the emotion regulation questionnaires out there, like the DERS, they're almost all about navigating negative emotions. And but what they were talking about is like, well, the difference is like whether you can cheer yourself up again. And, like if something bad happens to you, you had a flat tire on your way into work one morning, is that gonna ruin your morning? Is that gonna ruin your day? Is that gonna ruin your week? I mean, how long is it gonna be before you can like let go of that and like move on and upregulate your emotions to not just being like not angry or not upset, but actually like moving them into positive emotion territory. And this is also something that there is surprisingly, I mean, given how huge the emotion regulation literature is, there's surprisingly little about it. Susan Folkman wrote a really very thoughtful theoretical paper about it way back in like 2000, I think it was. It was early 2000s for sure. And and then we just couldn't find anything empirical about it. And so we made a measure for that and we did the same thing. We wrote up these items, we did these cognitive interviews or whatever. And that is actually turning out to be an incredibly promising aspect. And we're getting fantastic results from that. And so I really think that that is something that really was worth continuing to invest in terms of like our research energy. So even though there's a whole bunch of things on here that now I can look at that and go, well, that wasn't a very good idea. I just want you to know that I thought they were good ideas at the time. And sometimes there's like tons and tons of research behind them of other people saying that these are like really super important. But I think we do have to learn how to discard things and let go of them if they're not, promising for what our own particular focus is. So what we found so if you count poly strengths, which is our like dosage measure on the good side, you get up to 65 modifiable strengths. Probably a lot of you know that in the resilience portfolio model, we're only interested in strengths that you can change, not demographic characteristics or childhood history, like you had a, great first grade teacher or whatever. I mean, that's nice if it happened, but if you're 30 years old, there's nothing that can be done about who your first grade teacher was, right? And so, like, just things that can be changed now. And what far and away has come out the best is sense of purpose and helping people develop some kind of feeling like they've got some mission in life, which of course I think is why we're all here today. And I often think it's quite funny that we don't we often don't offer the people that we're working with like the same thing that maybe helped us. Positive emotion regulation, or and the VIA version is they call it ZEST, which is kind of weird, I think. But that actually came in number 2. Negative emotion regulation and poly strengths. I mean, in terms of the ones that were the best predictors, it was this list here. And I think it's pretty striking that out of all 65 strengths, only 8 variables were ever number 1. But if you go into and look at like overall significance in the predicted direction, it's amazing how many of them just really don't work out. So sense of purpose, again, we kind of put hope and optimism together. We feel those are pretty close constructs. We normally think of gratitude as more of an interpersonal thing, but in the the values and action scale, which we used in our most recent study. It's more about being like a thankful person. And those were the only 3 variables out of the 19 meaning-making strengths that we examined that were significant in the predicted direction more than half the time across these 40-some outcome measures that we had across these 16 data sets. There are a couple of others that we think maybe if we tweak them a little bit, we're ready to try like a new version of moral meaning making. I don't have time to go into the details of it, and then most of them are just not even close. I mean, you'd be surprised in multivariate analyses how many of these have never once. I mean, they're not all in all 16 of these data sets, but still, almost all of them are in at least 2 or 3 data sets, and some of them are in like 8 or 9 data sets, and they just run analysis after analysis, and they're never significant in the predicted direction. For regulatory strengths, it's an even shorter list, and both of these came out of our clinical and qualitative experiences. So the concept of positive emotion regulation, I already told you, psychological endurance. On the interpersonal one, we've examined more strengths in this domain than any of the others, but we still only have one that is looking very promising, and that's social support received. And I want to mention that because not all of these studies were ones that I was the PI on, that there are 5 other social support measures, some that I tried and some that some other people tried, and actually none of them work. So we really had to go back because we're like, we know social support is, like we've got to be something there. And we were able to really reconstruct that measure to focus more on actual help that people received instead of just whether it was available or whether they had a big social network or not. And then love, which is a VIA scale, that's the one we think maybe with a little tweaking it could be better. And then all the others are really like down there competing for the bottom. Also, I mentioned that relational motivation was significant in the wrong direction. We actually had quite a long list of measures out of these 65 that were either significant in the wrong direction multiple times, or they were significant in the wrong direction without ever having like a significant, and again, these are all multivariate analyses. And so I know there's, people have different appreciation of like regression, but basically if you put a lot of different strengths in a model instead of just like a single one, then you are really capturing only like the unique elements of it instead of just some sort of more generic positive thing in your life. And that is why we think that a lot of these things have I just really want to wrap up fast because I don't want to take up too much time, but polystrengths, we're working on that. We think it's really a promising idea, but we also think you got to get out all of the bad stuff out of this score, which is definitely like a problem right now. We're going to come back to this, but we have like a pretty short list of what we think are most important and what matter most now and what would really be the ones to beat in like future multivariate research. And we do have a bunch of ideas that I'm actually not going to go into right now for the interest of time. But basically, we think that there's a lot of different reasons why in multivariate analyses, some of these things could be coming up in the wrong direction, and that there might be like caregiver burden or toxic elements to some of these constructs, and that we really need to regroup our measures in some way, if it's possible, to extricate like the good parts of these things without capturing also the burdensome elements of them. And I'm gonna kick it to you, Vicky.
Okay, so I'm just gonna get this going here. Share my screen. There we go. Okay, hoping people can see that. So I'm just gonna do a even shorter presentation than Sherry to just talk about some of the themes and things that we're learning that are gonna reinforce what Sherry said and talk about some new directions that emerged from the scoping reviews that many of you have been working on. see if I can get this to work. There we go. Having a little trouble with technology. So just as the strength of the reviews, these are scoping reviews. They're qualitative, but they are very systematic and scoping reviews using the resilience portfolio model as an organizing theory and looking across different areas of trauma and different areas of resilience. And I think some of the strengths across the reviews are that they draw from interdisciplinary articles and research, that they, with limitations, but nonetheless do represent more of a global perspective than we often see in individual studies, and that we definitely, people were taking advantage of team science and lots of people on the teams doing reviews and thinking through things, and I think it really shows in some of what we're able to learn from them. So one of the first themes from across the scoping reviews is really what we think about as a tailored understanding, that different, and I think this is, it's interesting. I think it's both maybe a finding and an artifact of methodology, but the different strengths are emphasized in different populations. So just as two, so at times, right, like this represents assumptions about groups rather than a real reflection of strength variation. So we think there probably are some moderating factors. The reviews, especially ones that took more of a global perspective, were able to show that there might be some variations and some unique strengths, and in fact that we don't do very well at understanding unique strengths from different parts of the world in different communities, but that also our understandings are really hampered by some of the assumptions that we have going in, and therefore the way we define our methods and our questions and our measures that we use with different populations. So for example, interpersonal strengths were across the reviews most widely studied, but this was especially for samples of young people. And I think it's really interesting, Susan Yoon and colleagues were sort of reflecting that this may reflect an assumption that youth need support, right? And that there's less study of youth in and of themselves as autonomous strength, resilience machines themselves, right? And so we study them in terms of social support. And so we understand relatively little about other areas of strengths, including meaning making, which tends to be more kind of purpose, future oriented, those things. And then interestingly, another scoping review focused on veterans was like one of the biggest foci of those things was of those studies was regulatory strengths, which again may reflect assumptions about military culture and things that mean that people kind of gravitate towards exploring that more as an area of resilience for that group. Meaning making overall was relatively understudied, but was much more prevalent in relation to studies of collective forms of violence. So just kind of interesting to check ourselves both as scientists about how those assumptions may be creeping into the way we design our studies, and that we need to do a lot more work to really understand what that variation is across communities. So just some of the takeaways for the different areas of the resilience portfolio. Meaning making was overall understudied, especially understudied with community levels of measurement. Work was one of the places where we saw some really creative and interesting findings coming up. Here are some of the strengths. I think Sherry already went over that, but that these were confirmed as the focus of a lot of studies across the scoping reviews. Regulatory, this had to do with coping, with emotion regulation and awareness, psychological endurance, mindfulness, and perspective taking, and what we're calling kind of self-care and self-soothing kinds of behaviors. So these were again some of the common themes related to regulatory strengths, which again I think supports what Sherry was talking about. And then the usual suspects related to interpersonal, though I think it's important to note that really we're starting to try to create this new bucket of what we think about as community relational resources, which can include things like access to therapy and other kinds of services, but also broader issues like school climate, things that are in the outer layers. We can talk about whether it's outer layers or integrated, but whatever, things that are beyond the individual, but are still interpersonal, like things like school climate are still driven by the people. And so in that way, we've been thinking about those in this domain. What emerged from the scoping reviews and that we're really trying to add to the resilience portfolio now is a fourth domain, which we're calling environmental strengths. And this, we're saying, does not include the social ecology, right? Because the social ecology is about people, about social norms, all those things. So that goes with interpersonal. And instead, we're talking about aspects of the natural environment, green and blue spaces, interactions with animals, aspects of the built environment, and policy environment. And I will say that across the scoping reviews, but particularly in one of the reviews that several of us worked on together at the community level, the natural environment and green space is really showing up as a winner across these reviews, even though probably need to be doing more of that in our social science lane. So implications really that each of the resilience portfolio model domains can be measured at multiple levels, individual, dyadic, community levels. And I like to just remind people of collective efficacy as an example because mostly it's measured at the individual level. So we ask people, what are your attitudes about your community? Do you think people work together? But we did in some of these scoping reviews find people actually trying to measure that, trying to measure social capital, trying to measure collective efficacy at a neighborhood level, like doing a separate survey and creating an average score for different neighborhoods, which I think is interesting and pushes our thinking. We really want to move to moving demographic characteristics outside of the resilience portfolio model. The idea is that these could be brought in as moderators. Think back to the tailoring slide I was talking about before instead, but really trying to encourage people to say, okay, why are you using this demographic? Is it truly a moderator? In which case, let's use it as a moderator, but it's not part of the resilience portfolio model. Or if we think that the demographic characteristic is a marker for something else, then let's go measure that something else. And then, of course, one of the big takeaways was that we need better measures. So there we are. Back to you, Sherry.
Thank you, Vicky. And so I hope that this will help you understand our new call for papers, which we would really, I guess I'll put it on there. Love to get, folks from the RPC to submit to this. It is an open call. It's not limited to RPC members, but we are very excited to be in psychological trauma. It's got one of the highest impact factors of the violence journals. It put out like new violence data. You might know, depending on how much of a student of impact factors you are, that review journals tend to have higher impact factors. So like trauma, violence, and abuse were the first special issues coming out is higher than psych trauma. But compared to things like Psych of Violence or Journal of Interpersonal Violence or Journal of Trauma and Dissociation or Journal of Aggression, Maltreatment, and Trauma, like all those kinds of things, it's like when it's like higher than all of those. So we're very happy to be with it. I want to give a shout out to Matt Hagler, who is here, who is also one of the co-editors on this special issue, along with Jackie Duran from University of Kentucky and Cristobal Guerra from the University, it's like, what am I going to say this thing wrong? Universidad Santo Tomás, which is in Chile. But one of the things that we are really quite serious about that I hope you will get a sense of from what we're just talking about is that we really are focusing on multidimensional strengths-based approaches to resilience. So like we already got our first submission, and our first submission only had one strength. It had cognitive flexibility, and I'm sure cognitive flexibility is like a great thing to have. I don't have any problems with cognitive flexibility, but it didn't compare it to anything else. And so this goes back to like my story about relational motivation. I mean, if you look at like the bivariate correlations, in fact, with all of those 64 individual strengths that I showed you before, every single solitary one of them is significantly correlated in a positive direction with at least one of our outcomes. And most of them are positively correlated with many of these outcome variables. So the question is not whether, any of these things are good for you. I think they're pretty much all like nice things to have in the world. But the question is like which ones of them are like most helpful for overcoming trauma? And the only way you can answer that question is if you put them in competition with each other and like figure out which ones are the winners. So this special issue, that is going to be one of the most unique elements about it, is that every paper, whether it's qualitative, we love qualitative work, so it's absolutely open to being qualitative, or quantitative, or if it's a scoping review or whatever it is, but it has to include at least two different strengths. And our work typically had our resilience portfolio to work to date, the stuff that's come out of LifePaths has included anywhere from like 10 to 29 strengths. So if you want to do more than two, like we're not going to think that's bad. We're going to be like, yeah, go with, go with 10, go with 15, or whatever your sample size can support. And then the other thing is that it's really, as we've already said, we're really interested in malleable strengths, the kinds of things that can become targets for intervention or prevention. So you can input demographic characteristics in your study or genetic factors or things like that, but it has to be stuff that can become, I think I just put my clinical hat on, and it's like, how would you change this if you were offering, a group or doing individual therapy? And if you can't think that it can be changed, like, like somebody's demographic characteristics, if those can't be changed in therapy, then we're not really interested in them. We're like trying to drive the science of healing here. We're especially interested in any data sets that come from outside of North America, because there's still such a disproportionate, you'll see this it kind of depended a little bit on the topic, and some of the ones that my students have done. Obviously, like if you're focusing on a particular country, then all the work is going to be based in that country. And Caltrine and I did one a few years ago on Kosovo and other Balkan nations. But if you take a topic that's not geographically driven, then it's amazing how high the percentage is of work that's conducted in the United States. And we are really hoping to try to shift that in any way that you can. As I said, we are open to quantitative studies that look at multiple strengths. You don't have to use, and in fact, we would really be even more thrilled if you didn't use quote unquote measure of resilience as the outcome. As the last session, we kind of dug deep into like the Connor-Davidson and some of the other measures. And, basically the Connor-Davidson questionnaire has like 8 questions on regulatory strengths, got like 5 on coping and 3 on emotion regulation or something like that. And then it has like 1 on meaning making and 1 on social support. So I think most of those measures are just untested ideas about what the ingredients of thriving after trauma is. They're not actually measures of thriving or well-being or flourishing and for people in a traumatized population. So we encourage you to think about more direct measures of people's functioning, whether it's subjective well-being or post-traumatic growth or symptoms or health-related quality of life. We're open to lots of different ideas. As Vicki said, if you are interested in demographics, we encourage you to think about that as moderators, which means basically looking for subgroups, like do boys need different strengths than girls, or do adolescents need different strengths than older adults, or, like those are what we mean by moderator analyses. As I already said, I'm super interested in qualitative studies, scoping reviews, measurement papers, prevention or intervention studies. We're really wide open as long as it has at least 2 protective factors in it. I don't care what they are, 2 malleable protective factors. And I can just tell that I'm going to be composing a lot of emails about people who don't understand that, but we have gotten some queries, some exciting queries about people who do clearly have that kind of data. I think actually think a lot of people have data that is basically on how healing and how people overcome trauma, and they don't even realize it, that they're not used to thinking about it in terms of like resilience or overcoming trauma or things like that. And I guess the other thing is that I mean, if anybody's interested in the measures that we're developing, so Vicky and we basically have things kind of in like four buckets. So like the big winners of this in the 16 studies that I just told you about. Bucket number two are ones that we think have got some pretty good quantitative data, but we're not completely happy with the measures as they currently are for various and sundry reasons. Bucket number three is really stuff that we think is important based on the scoping review. Oh no, this is not the one. From the reviews or intervention evidence or some of our qualitative work, but for whatever reason, we think that these also need some measurement work, probably a little bit more than bucket number two. And then bucket number four is some of that stuff, like I guess what I will just highlight maybe are a couple in the meaning making thing. So like social justice activism and culture, tradition, and ceremony. Those are things that people keep talking about in the qualitative work like over and over again, but we really don't have very many good standardized scales to measure that kind of stuff. And so those really need a lot of work. Or spirituality is something that comes up in the qualitative stuff over and over and over again, but it actually, in terms of having direct significant results in the wrong direction, it was by far like the worst performing measure out of the 64 that we've included in and not just with like not even with just like a single measure, with like multiple different measures. And I think it's because there can be a lot of toxic elements to some certain kinds of organized religion, if they're pressuring you to stay with a violent partner or something like that. And we haven't really figured that out, but we are gonna try to take another go with that. But if anybody's interested in working with some of our measures, we're totally open to that. And now I'm gonna kick it back to you, Vicky, if you want to just throw it open for questions.
Yeah, so maybe we'll just start with some questions. If anybody has questions about the special issue, maybe start with that. Okay, hearing none. Um, one of the things that we kind of advertise and sort of hope aspirationally for the RPC, and I think we've been working on it, is that it is also a community of scholars, a way for us to find connection in the work that we're doing. And so in the time that we have, I wonder if we could do some popcorning. And again, this is just, there's no pressure, but if there's something that's top of mind, something that you're working on, that you're really excited about with related to strengths or resilience that you'd like to share out in the community, I think it's a way that we can continue to get to know one another's work. You've just heard a lot about the stuff Sherry and I have been working on. So enough from us. Love to hear from you all about the stuff that wakes you up excited to go to work in the morning, even though it's dark now in the morning.
I guess I have a little bit of a methodological question. I guess more when you're working with writing and interpreting data that you already have. Um, just for example, we have a very large data set. Joe was unfortunately he had to make an exit. But we have a very large data set that includes the Connor Davidson, looking at individuals who are disabled, and a lot of outcome variables related to health and well-being. I'm curious how you might kind of think about approaching that kind of data set with a mind towards resilience, like or looking at those as possible outcome variables and what kind of framing you might think is valuable. But
Anybody want to jump in? Think about that.
I will. I mean, I think of the Connor-Davidson as not really an outcome variable, but really like a measure of protective factors. If you've got, and when we encounter it in the scoping reviews, we mostly code it in the regulatory category as a measure of regulatory strengths because, like I said, like depending, there's some differences across the different versions that are out there, but probably the most commonly used version is the 10-item short form, and that one's like 80% regulatory and 5%, 10% meaning making and 10% interpersonal. And so when my students are, well, including yours, Matthew, if we encounter that in the scoping reviews, we cover it in the regulatory domain. But if you've got the actual data yourself, I mean, I would encourage you to consider, I mean, depending if you're going to, depending on where you submit it, of like scoring it so that you're only capturing the regulatory stuff. So you have like a pure measure of regulatory strengths, and really thinking about it in terms of one of the mechanisms, like more in the middle of the model and not the outcome. And then the outcome is like subjective well-being or trauma symptoms or whatever. And like, how does being higher on resilience, or as the Connor-Davidson measures it, which is basically being high on coping and emotion regulation, like how does that contribute to you doing better in the world? And that's what I would do with it.
Appreciate the question. I think it's helpful, especially when we're looking into data sets and trying to take a strengths-based perspective when it's been developed with a different mindset. I mean, I think the Connor-Davidson was developed to look at strengths, but I think it gets labeled as resilience as an outcome instead of as it kind of measures as Sherry was saying, mechanisms. So the strengths piece. Great, but thanks, Matthew.
We are totally open on the terms of the special issue too, to secondary data analyses. And, we understand that. I think there's tons of data out there that could really speak to a lot of the questions that we're interested in, and, was not designed with, not just our model, but like any one of these like multi-dimensional resilience approaches, which is what has really, I think, the direction the field's going into. So like Michael Unger's model or the ecological resilience model, which came out of Italy and is really very similar to the resilience portfolio model. I mean, if you want to use any of those frameworks, but even if you want to take something that was designed to study this, but still has some measures of victimization, some measures of protective factors, and some measures of outcomes, then it can certainly be, this framework can certainly be applied to it, or any of those frameworks can be applied to it.
Mm-hmm.
Would you all be interested in possibly us trying to organize some working groups we've especially been kind of thinking about bucket number 4 and the ones that are starting from scratch on in terms of measurement development, or that we think are important, but the quantitative measures out there are just really problematic, like the spirituality stuff. And potentially joining like would you like to, that be something that we offered or tried to organize, kind of like we did the scoping review teams?
I've seen some nodding heads.
Yeah, I think that would be
Yes.
great.
Yeah, I agree. That would be wonderful. A great way to be engaged and involved with this work hands-on.
I love that idea.
Yep. Great.
So maybe what we could do, Sherry, is we can organize sort of a spreadsheet thing. I think that's how we organize some of the scoping reviews, was sort of putting some topics and then people in like a Google sheet, right? That people can then go in. So stay tuned. We'll send something around, and people, if you're interested, you can go jump into the categories we've listed and add your own if you have something else, but a great way to get people connected. I think that sounds good. Good. All right, we're almost at time, Sherry. I don't know if there's we might give you 2 minutes back in your day.
Yeah. Any last thoughts or questions? Sheila, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a related question, I guess. I've seen like some of your emails about various like writing groups, and it's sort of fallen off of when those are happening. So when are those happening?
Yeah, well, those are, I mean, those aren't really like project meetings, but on Monday
Yeah.
afternoons it's 2 o'clock Central, or on Thursday mornings, which is at 9 o'clock Central, we have a mindful writing group. Some of the folks here, Nicole and Neely, is she on here? Have participated in these, and yeah, and I mean, I love those spaces. They're great spaces, but people bring their own stuff to work on during those sessions, or more like a writing sprint with some mindfulness and group camaraderie added. And
Yeah, the reason I ask is I'm looking for to make some protected space to work on resilience projects that I'm behind on.
yeah, that is definitely perfect for that. If you want to, when we send out at the beginning of each month, the schedule for that on the ResCom listserv. So I think you're probably on that, but if not, you should definitely um, get on that. That's the best way to keep up with that kind of stuff. If you go to our website, you can find the ways to access that. Because Thanksgiving is, we have a couple, I guess, left this month. If you email me, I can give you the link to them if you want to try to do it before the Thanksgiving holiday.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. It's really great to see all of you. Good luck with end of semester, if folks are on a semester calendar with their work. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. So, and in the meantime, stay tuned. We'll have a monthly minute again in December. Susie Mariscal is going to be sharing some of her resilience research with us, which is always awesome. And we'll put together sort of a Google sheet with some potential topics to get people started finding some research communities for people who are looking for projects.
Yeah, although that may or may not happen before Thanksgiving,
but that's not going to happen before
it will.
Thanksgiving.
It will happen.
Oh, it will? Okay.
Well, no, not before Thanksgiving, but like
it will happen.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't think it will happen in the next week.
No, not before next week. Yeah. But anyway, it was great to see you all. Thanks so much for coming.
Call for the special issue, Sherry. Will you send it out again? Some people are asking.
Yeah, or if you also can go to the psychological trauma website, it's posted on there.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thanks,
Take
y'all.
care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.